What's the worst thing you've tolerated to avoid confrontation? It was late at night on a packed bus. Some giant sweaty dude came on and was standing really close to this girl. As more people got off the bus, it got to the point where there was absolutely no reason for this guy to be standing anywhere near her, let alone full body pressed against her. She had her back turned, head down, avoiding eye contact and just waiting for that moment to be over. Well, apparently everyone on the bus that night was willing to tolerate this to avoid confrontation, except 17-year-old me. Jabbed my fingers in his back 3 times and said, "Hey, you're suffocating her," in as stern a voice a teenage girl can manage. He got off that bus as quickly as possible to avoid confrontation. You are totally badass. In case there's any doubt. My father's wedding. Absolutely hate his wife, her kids. She's a witch, and that's not even biased. She's the type to go out of her way to lie in court in a case she has nothing to do with to make people miserable. He basically blackmailed my sibling and I to come to the wedding, which we were informed of a week prior as an important event, and the night before as his actual second wedding, or he would never come to ours in the future. Yeah, kinda wish I was a confrontational person. Just this one time. It would have been glorious. Oh, and then he didn't inform my mother of it. See, we kept the secret for another 2 years until he slipped up. Not my story to tell, and that was a conversation I didn't want to have. Lied in court to make someone miserable? WTF kinda monster does that crap? A criminal, because that crap is a crime. You guys shouldn't be allowed to become NICU nurses unless you've had a premature baby yourself. Obviously from a mom in the worst moment of her life. We get a lot of horrible comments or tongue lashing from parents who are just scared, frustrated or mad. I can't retaliate or say anything I might want to say, so we just sit quietly and say we are sorry they're in this situation. Wow. My baby spent a month in the NICU, and while it was definitely one of the most stressful things I've experienced, I can't imagine being ugly or saying something like that to any of the wonderful people who took care of him. I'm so sorry you encounter things like that. It's true that people who are scared can be hurtful or do atypical things. However, I firmly believe that times of stress and fear pretty much just bring out what people already have inside them. So if someone is horrible to someone else, I tend to think that they are probably not very nice people to begin with. My best friend started to fake my very serious medical condition and pretends he needs a wheelchair. I couldn't say anything because I lived with him and he blackmailed/manipulated me. I couldn't afford the confrontation. The full story. My best friend, let's call him R, is the type of person to pick up medical and mental conditions. If he hears about it, he suddenly has it. He's always dismissive of other people's experiences and feelings, and he loves attention, negative or positive, so he always starts drama when he's bored, and often gains his friends' disabilities and mental health conditions. Well, 3 years ago nearly I've had to use a wheelchair as there was something wrong with my legs. Story for another time, and I was only diagnosed after a year of suffering from it, as it's extremely uncommon. By this time I have moved to another town and lost contact with R. Now at the beginning of this year I have been starting to walk again with crutches, but I still struggle a lot and it's painful in my knees. A few months ago, just before COVID hit, I had an argument with my dad and stayed with R for a while. Because I was in crutches he could never one-up me, and his attention-seeking behavior seemed to get worse the longer I stayed. Suddenly he had knee problems and needed to use a fold-up walking stick. Fine, that's fair. However, whenever I mentioned my legs or my crutches or my medication condition, just suddenly his legs would hurt and he would need his stick. He also would walk perfectly fine unless someone else was upset/has the center of attention, and so he suddenly couldn't walk, so the focus would switch to him. Despite all this constantly happening, I couldn't go back to my dad's place, so I decided to move in for a while until my situation died down at home. The situation with R became unbearable because that's when he started to claim he has my medical condition without being seen by a doctor or anything. Now this was a serious claim, and I was willing to help him, though everything as I've been through it all However, his symptoms were nothing like my medication condition, and whenever I told him this, he said well it works differently for everyone, which is true, but these symptoms were completely unrelated. He would constantly change his story and his symptoms. He would also call me a bad friend and say I had no idea what I was talking about. One day it just got too much, so I was sleeping over at another friend's house and I told her everything that was happening. During this time I decided he needed a wheelchair and he refused to walk. His mum said he didn't need a wheelchair and refused to buy him one, so he brought one himself using his savings. Now this would be fine, however I struggle to look and be around wheelchairs due to being stuck in one for a year. It was the lowest point in my life so far, so it's understandable. He knew this because I've told him. So when I get back I see a wheelchair in the hall and I start having a panic attack. His mum explained the situation when she realized the wheelchair was in the hall, and when it's gone and I'm calm, she also knows about how I'm around wheelchairs. R crawls around the house on his knees, even though they apparently hurt, and only use the wheelchair downstairs. I suspect he left it in the hall for me to see on purpose, as he knew when I was coming back, but there's no way of knowing. From then I just started to ignore R and wouldn't go near him. He didn't like this as he wanted the attention. It just became too much. I would constantly be stressed and anxious and I just didn't feel comfortable or safe being there. I couldn't go back to my dad's, so I decided to move into my mum's. I told R's mum everything about how I was feeling, and she was so sorry. She's a sweet person, and she had no idea what she was going to do, as COVID hit and R refused to get his legs checked because he could be infected because of his other conditions. So I start packing my stuff to move out, and R actually went through some of my things and took some of my MacUp while I wasn't looking. I packed it, and when I phoned him about it, he said he took, but he'd give it back if I went upstairs and talked to him face to face. Screw that. I moved into my mum's, and now R claims he has something wrong with the tissues in his muscles and that's why he needs the wheelchair. It was the worst experience, and it was just totally humiliating and painful. But I had to keep my mouth shut and remain civil with him, because I know he'll tell everyone secrets about me and stuff. He's done it before, and I've known him for years. Sorry that this is just so long. A lot has happened, and this situation is still very new in my mind. It seems he does have a serious issue, just not physical. This really isn't normal attention-seeking behavior. My driving instructor used to debate me on Islam vs Christianity, though I'm not sure why. I'm agnostic. Of course I was completely fine with this. In fact, as a Welsh-born and bred village lad living in a big multicultural city for the first time, I found it fascinating. He was a fantastic instructor and clearly a good dude. But at one stage he tried his best to convince me that the Charlie Hebdo shooting was justified. I've never been so glad to be in a situation where eye contact is actively dissuaded. Reminds me of my driving instructor who told me on my first lesson that he only took me on as a student because my name sounded white. Middle class didn't really know how to respond to that. Was he saying it in confidence because you are white, or was he like, oh I didn't know you were ethnic when I agreed to instruct you? Either way, a good excuse me is the only way I would approach that if I didn't just say go frick yourself. When I was 16, a distant sort of family member, not blood related, of mine was taking a trip to America to stay with their cousins, and having heard how badly I wanted to go there, they asked if I wanted to come with, paying for my plane ticket and everything. I was practically just acquaintances with them, and I had major social anxiety, but it was an amazing offer, so I agreed. So I stay in this trailer with the three of them, all over 70, and all is going surprisingly well. A few days and we go out for pizza, and whilst at the table, they begin a conversation, seemingly out of nowhere, about gay marriage. They're discussing, loudly, in a packed restaurant, how absolutely disgusting it is that gay people should be able to marry, and how it is an insult to the institution of marriage and practically any other wildly homophobic bullcrap you can think of, and they are all unanimously agreeing. Meanwhile, I'm sitting there, not straight at all, visibly sweating, not only because I'm terrified they might pull me up on my sudden silence and ask me my opinion and or why I'm sweating, but also because I'm humiliated to be seen to be involved in this awful conversation by all the other tables who can definitely hear them. I interacted politely for the rest of the trip, thanked them for housing me, and have not had any contact since. But assholes and idiots can get married and no one cares. I don't understand. About a dozen things that compounded upon themselves into me walking away from a job I held down with job security. GF at the time and I are both working alongside each other at a country club job and living with each other. She breaks up with me but still needs to live with me because she didn't have anyone or anywhere else to go. Fricked up family ties. Point 1. I have to kick her out of our apartment after she packed everything up to leave one day and left with a car financed under my stepdad and insured by me, literally vehicular theft, and leaves me with dealing with rent on my own. 2 and 3. She starts seeing another coworker of ours who is already engaged to someone else. 4 and 5. I get stuck working and having to act like I'm not aware of what's going on and that I'm fine for up to 6 goddamn weeks. 6. I'm already sick and crippled for most of all this duration due to damaging a sciatic nerve in my leg and getting stuck on a cane. 7. And having to juggle physical therapy and my medical bills and a loss of income to my rent. 8. 10. And my job at work took a nosedive on me as the jackass responsible for my schedule has me prepping banquets on a bum leg and in pain at a goddamn country club by myself. 11. And then one day I arrive to work. As soon as I arrive to my shift and punch in, I'm already getting screamed at and chewed out by an ex-marine, and not for something I failed to do since I just arrived to shift, but because the team before me was slacking off and made us fall behind in front of everybody as though I'm the sole motherfucker responsible for this bass job falling behind. 12. I had had it. Right then and freaking there I had finally had enough of all the bullshit I was already dealing with after feeling like the lowest man on earth for up to 4 months of my life. And so I walked out and left it all behind and moved to the next city over back with my mother. I wasn't just mad, I was breaking down, and I was breaking myself down most of all. I was dying inside and I needed to run. I don't have any fond memories of any of the people from that job or even my first romance, because I was made to hate myself for far too long that I hated them. I'm in a far better place now than I was back then. I have a new romance that's also pretty serious with the smartest and kindest soul I've ever met, and my job not only pays better, but the people are better too. Even my boss treats me like a good friend. Glad to hear you're doing better. Thank you. My current work situation as of Tuesday. As part of my job I handle the timesheets for my office and my coworker checks them to see if everything is recorded correctly. If I make a mistake, I understand I need correction, but the way she's been handling it lately has been too much. Now instead of calling me over to her desk, she just lectures me in front of the entire office. Then sometimes she complains to sups about me within earshot, pretty much repeating what she said very loudly to my face. She's even made me cry once, but that was more frustration honestly. I'm an angry crier. I say as of Tuesday because the last blow up over a timesheet error that I handled on my own was one too many. I finally had too much and told my sup it was bothering me. I'm hoping she can mediate between us so I don't start to panic every time I hear my coworker say a certain way. Workplace bullying. It's a toxic work environment. Document what's happening. See a doctor about the stress/anxiety. Your employer has a responsibility to provide a safe work environment. Report it to your employer. Best case, it stops. Worst case you end up using and get a payout. I didn't want to consider it that because it's really not that bad a lot of the time. Then I realized I was making excuses. My therapist pointed out I do that a lot. I will be talking to my boss about it when she gets back, and if need be talking to my union rep about things. 2 years of Bible study with Jehovah's Witnesses. Because saying no, thank you was not my strong suit. I'm an atheist. I would love to hear the story of how you managed to not say no in this situation. It sounds like something that would happen to George in Seinfeld. Lol, yes, it does. It wasn't that complicated, but they are professionals, and I was just a young SAHM. They showed up at my door, and so I talked with them a few minutes, and eventually they asked if it was okay if they stopped by again sometime. I said okay, because saying anything else would be rude. So they dropped by randomly for a chat and to drop off a watchtower every couple weeks, and eventually I somehow invited them inside, and then they started showing up regularly at the same time every Wednesday, or whatever, and it just became a regular thing for an hour or two every week. It only ended when I moved. We were having another baby in a few months, and needed a bigger place. Funny thing is, I moved back to that area about 8 years later, and the same two ladies showed up at my door. I introduced them to my now 7-year-old son, and they remembered me. It was nice. They were pretty cool people. My childhood best friend. She was a toxic pathological liar, and once I stopped falling for her bullcrap she just used me for kicks and smoked with my brother. There were a few moments where cumulative feelings finally built up and me putting my foot down came off as being the bad guy. She'd re-enter my life at any old time she felt like it. Never acknowledged me when we went to the same school because she had a reputation to uphold. I would have left earlier if she wasn't my only friend, and we basically only petered out just after high school. It's so crazy how toxic these childhood friendships can be, but leaving them doesn't seem like an option. And it's like you forget the bad situations because the good ones make it worth it, or because you have history. It doesn't come to an end until they do something absolutely push you over the edge. Years ago I was at a family Thanksgiving dinner at my dad's cousin's house. Her now deceased husband was a bigot, a misogynist, and an overall conservative asshole. I had to sit across from him while he dastardly berated my mother, told her that women should not have the right to vote and were nothing more than home and baby makers. He used some rather colorful language in the process. I was ready to leap across the table and beat the crap out of him, but my mother tried to keep me in check. I admittedly lost a little respect for both my parents that day for keeping the peace and making me play along, but I gave that a shat uncle no time whatsoever, even when he was dying of cancer. It's the one time in my life that I wish that I had both said and done something severe and against the family norm. My grandfather is basically the same way, and even at 12 years old my cousin, boy, was allowed to sit at the adult table at gatherings, and I was dismissed with a literal wave of the hand and not a word while being handed dishes. My mom was across the table motioning for calm, so I handed it to my cousin. AMD said, "Hey, you can get this right," and sat down.